billion next year, for a total of $12.5 billion. Now, the New York delegation was rather clever, because the funding is for states and cities and counties, states and local governments and counties. New York City is unique in the country in being consisting of 5 counties. So we have 3 pots of money in here: one for the state government, one for the city government, I just mentioned them, and one for the county governments, which is to say Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, which amounts to the city. So the counties, New York City counties, Kings, Queens, New York, Bronx, and Richmond, are going to get $3 billion this year and $1.6 billion next year. So the total for New York City will be $11.5 billion this year and almost $6 billion next year, for a total of $17 billion. The MTA is going to be given separately $4 billion. Now, we gave the MTA $4 billion in the 2 bills ago, I think it was. Mm-hmm. They asked for another 4. We're giving them another 4. I suspect they'll need more than that, and we'll have to deal with that in the future. Now, the bill establishes a HEROES fund for essential workers with $200 billion to ensure that essential workers who have risked their lives working during their pandemic receive hazard pay. It supports testing, tracing, and treatment, which we know is absolutely essential if we're going to open the economy at some point, with $200 billion, with $75 billion for testing and contact tracing and isolation measures. This will ensure that every American can access free treatment, and supporting hospitals and providers. We're also providing funds in this bill. I don't know the exact amount, so that people who are struck by the coronavirus, we will pay, the federal government will pay the out-of-pocket costs. That is, whatever the insurance, the Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance doesn't pay. So people will not have a net cost to the coronavirus. There will be we're going to have economic impact payments of $1,200 per family member of people earning, I think it's under $75,000 a year, or $150,000 per couple, up to $6,000 per household. All right, we're strengthening the payroll protection program to ensure that it reaches underserved communities by providing $10 billion for emergency grants through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. We're going to preserve health coverage by protecting Americans losing their employer-provided health insurance, because when people lose their jobs, they lose their health insurance, with COBRA subsidies to maintain their coverage, and create a special enrollment period in the Affordable Care Act for uninsured Americans, because they've closed the enrollment period. The extra unemployment benefits of $600 per week expire, I think, in July. We've extended them through next January. When we originally passed this, the assumption was that we were going to get out of this pretty quickly, but I don't think we are. So the extra $600 per person unemployment benefits per week are extended through next January. We're going to afford $175 billion in new supports to assist rent homeowners to subsidize rental payments and mortgage payments and utility payments. We enacted a moratorium on evictions, 4 months. New York State did for June 20th, but people were facing balloon payments at the end of that period. So we're going to provide $175 billion for rental payments and mortgage payments. You have to do both, obviously. If you say, because landlords need to pay the mortgages and property taxes and so forth. We're going to give about $4 billion, I think it is, to safeguard our democracy, so that we can do mail-in ballots. We have to give money to the post office and the Census Bureau. Those are some of the key. Let me mention a couple of other things. Some things that I particularly pushed for, which we got into the bill. It alleviates burdens to disaster loan borrowers who are deemed ineligible because of their prior criminal history. And we're changing that. We're eliminating the 75-25 rule. That's particularly important to to New York. I had led the fight on this, and because of the high commercial rents in New York,
Yep.
that didn't make sense. So we're eliminating that. That's gone if this bill passes. We're carving out, very important for New York, we're carving out 25% of the existing funds solely for the use of nonprofits, no matter their size or type, but requiring at least half of this amount go to small nonprofits under the 500 employee threshold. So for things like Broadway, for all our museums, et cetera. Now, nonprofit sounds nice, but it's 500,000 jobs in New York City are dependent on nonprofits. And we also want to have them around when we come out of this thing. We're extending the period for borrowers of PPP from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. It extends the covered period from June 30th to December 31st. So that will get rid of the problem that a lot of small businesses are having. You know, if I don't have all my employees back, do I rehire them by within 8 weeks? Otherwise, these the PPP loans are low interest, but they become grants that are forgiven if you retain your employees, or if you bring them back. They're designed to support employment. A lot of companies said, wait a minute, how can I keep them on? How can I get my workers back in 8 weeks? I don't know that I can open up in 8 weeks. So we're removing that and extending that from June 30th to 24 weeks and extending the period to the end of the year. Very important for the west side of Manhattan, we're extending eligibility to all nonprofits of all sizes, and we clarify that housing co-ops are eligible, like Penn South, for example. So housing co-ops will be eligible for this. And we're increasing expanding the pool of available capital for small firms by increasing the annual lending limit of the 7A program from 30 billion to 75 billion. As I said, this bill text only came out about an hour ago, and this is a hasty reading of looking at the provisions that I was particularly interested in because I helped get them in. The key is we're making this small business program much more flexible. We're getting rid of the 75-25 rule. We're extending the unemployment insurance. We're putting more money into all of this. We're giving the state and local governments $1 trillion, including the amounts I said for New York and for the MTA specifically. New York does very well in this bill, but again, this bill is not an agreed upon bill. The House will pass it probably on Friday, and then we will have to pressure the Republicans in the Senate and the administration. But I do think, given the way things are going politically and the pressures that are building up, and the fact that red states like Texas and Florida, which don't have income taxes, but they depend on sales taxes. What sales? They're having this. They're a little behind us because New York had the problem earlier than everybody else.
Yeah.
But everybody else is getting the same problem. So there's going to be tremendous pressure to do this, and I think we'll get most of what I just said sometime in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Congressman. Really, really appreciate for that update.